Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for coming along. And we're, myself and Richard, delighted to be here for what is our last in the veg patch for this year. So today we're going to be chatting a little bit about mainly about fruit and sort of what we're doing around fruit at HQ and how to bring that into your own garden. But obviously, you can ask us questions about anything you want, and we do have quite a few questions to get through already that have been sent through. Richard, how have things been going in the garden? Nice bright week in the week past, anyway.
It's been a lovely week to catch up. Everything's dried out. The sun's been on my back, and you have a spring in your step, really. So it's doing the big heavy-duty tidying up jobs like lining up paths again and clearing areas that needed clearing. So yeah, it's sort of week that you can't waste, really.
Yeah. Has the land dried out a good bit? Because we did have an incredibly wet couple of weeks before
Yes,
this.
I mean, the effort we've put in here to improve the soil means that it dries out a bit faster. We've got drainage and things in, but it's workable now. That's the advantage of improving your soil, really, that you have greater leeway as to when you can work it.
Yeah, deadly. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about fruit, because I know you're doing a bit of a fruit moving job at the moment. So this is the time of the year for kind of if you want to have a bit of fruit in your life next year in the garden, this is the kind of good time to start thinking about it, right?
It is. First thing is, if you're going to establish a fruit garden, don't have your boss tell you everything has to go on ridges. It's quite interesting, actually, because
I was wondering
everything would look lovely on ridges.
I was wondering how long it would take you to mention this. We're only like
very quick, wasn't it?
3 minutes in.
And he's had nothing but meetings for the last week, so I've been making them all myself. Probably find time on Monday now to finish them, won't you, Mick?
In my defense, you need to give a little bit of background and context to this now. So we're explain what you're doing, and then I'll explain why I suggested lazy beds as a nice approach to make it all.
Well, I'm breaking my back is what I'm doing. Mick thought they would look nice, and he's worried about getting his shoes dirty if the paths aren't all nice and level. So. I mean, I suppose these are considerations for people who rarely get out of an office these days. Very much a cerebral gardener, I think, Mick, aren't you, these days?
I am. I like planning things out and thinking about stuff. So we're moving some of the fruit. Some of it has to be sort of has to be moved, divided and split and so on. And partly we're moving it because we're planning a bit of work next year, and we need to sort of make space.
What I'm moving is the things you move when they're growing a little bit. So that's the globe artichokes and the rhubarb, which you move with little shoots on, essentially. And both of those have great big clumps of complicated root, big root block with different shoots on. And you quite crudely chop it up with a spade so that each chunk has 1 or 2 buds on it, and transplant them. If you don't, they tend to get a little bit tired, I suppose, and old. I know the feeling, actually, making these ridges all week. And they're moved traditionally in October, November, both of those. So we've created a new garden of rhubarb and globe artichokes there. But I would leave the transplanting of other fruits until well into December, really. The way that real gardeners plant them is as bare root plants, not from pots. So if you're getting fruit bushes in or fruit trees, get them in bare root from a good nursery. And you move things bare root and all the leaves have fell off. And with the climate emergency, I would have been at the beginning of my career planting away now, bare root plants, but the leaves are held on now into the first week or two of December. So the whole season's got a bit shorter, about a month shorter overall.
Wow.
2 weeks off the beginning, 2 weeks off the end. Yeah, wait a few weeks. You can order them now, and the rotisseries will be lifting them as soon as they can. And then you're transplanting those in December, January, February. They're the months that you get going.
Okay. So let's say you were completely new to this, right? And you were looking at wanting to bring a bit of fruit into your garden next year. What would be the sort of the top 5, say, that you'd think about as really good? Obviously, strawberries, I'm guessing you'd have in there. What else would you be thinking about?
The risk of sounding silly, what you really like to eat.
Yeah, fair point.
And some people like different things, but for instance, I absolutely love taberries, but not everybody does. And they're very vigorous and they crop well. If you're looking at top fruit apples, top fruit implies fruit grown on trees rather than bushes. So that's apples, pears, plums, cherries, and go for a reliable variety. The classic combination I recommend to people is James Grieve and Katie. Katie is a great apple because it's a lovely sweet apple that kids love, ready in September. Always crops. I've never known it fail, but it does need a pollinating partner. The risk of getting overcomplicated, apple trees need another variety to pollinate them. So you always put two together, and to be a good pollinating partner, they have to have the flowers open at the same time. Okay. So, I mean, it's not long enough now. We don't have long enough to go into every single combination, but there'd be two apples which are quite handy. They're both very reliable, and critically, we'll talk about pruning later. They'll tend to look after themselves if you're not into complicated pruning. They're often sold as easy care varieties. There's lots of really good traditional Irish varieties available from Seed Savers, a great organisation, and you can always chat to them, and they'll recommend traditional Irish varieties that are very good. Irish peach is a very popular one at the moment. I think that's the name of it, and a couple of others. I would recommend strawberries, obviously, if you want to grow soft fruit, and any of the others that you like, really. I mean, if you're a jam maker, gooseberries can be popular. People who make their own wine, red currants can be popular. Black currants are always a good one. And two very reliable gooseberry blackcurrant hybrids, Josterberries and Worcesterberries. They're lovely, tasty berries. So whatever you fancy, they all require a similar sort of treatment, i.e. planted in the winter into soil that's got a nice bit of fertility in it.
Yeah.
They'll be happy.
So is it a good kind of Christmas bit of time off at Christmas kind of a job, or is that too early? Like,
yes, I mean, 30 years ago, I said, "Oh, be careful if the ground's hard frozen. You won't be able to do it then." But when does that happen now?
Doesn't ever happen
So
anymore,
it'd be
does it?
an excellent. It'd be a great Christmas present for somebody, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Get them so bare root, and if you get the plants, obviously, you might get them middle of the week. You won't want to plant them, in the dark evenings. You might want to wait to the weekend or next weekend. Don't leave them in the bags. These haven't got any soil on the roots. They're bare roots. So dig a little hole. It's called healing in. Just tip them in a little hole or bunch them all together and keep the roots moist in some soil like that.
Yeah. We just mentioned I'm going to put it in the chat here as well, actually, the Chilean guava berry. I was given a couple of plants a couple of years ago, and we planted them in HQ, and we've since put a couple of more in, and the chef absolutely loves them because they're late harvesting, very tasty, very interesting, and apparently Queen Victoria's favorite fruit, somebody told me. They're kind of an interesting one, and I believe grow quite well in pots as well.
Yes, though pots, you have to remember to water them through the summer because a Chilean guava is very undemonstrative really. It'll just sit there in the pot for the summer. So you certainly can, as long as you water them every few days. But you grow them as an informal sort of hedge. They don't require any pruning. Take a couple of years to get going, but once they do, you'll get a couple of kilos per plant, and they come in late October, so they're a very handy thing to have when there's no other fruit in the garden.
There's a few questions there already in the chat. Don asks, can you grow rhubarb in a bag or pot?
You can, but it's never going to grow brilliantly because they have a huge root system by choice, and they love wet, fertile soil. So you're always better if you can to get them in the soil. If you're going to put them in a pot, same applies for everything really. Put them in as big a pot as you can possibly manage, and make sure they're well watered.
Yeah, very good. And like I always wonder then, so rhubarb, it's died back at this stage of the year. Like, are you supposed to cover them down with compost or a pot to Well, sorry, the compost over the winter is about feeding them, but then some people cover them with a pot to force them, so you get early.
It's a little bit early now. You tend to do it after Christmas, and the idea is that you get. It warms them up a bit and they go looking for light. So the stems grow very spindly and light coloured, which is a bit of a delicacy for us, rhubarb. Chef actually is not very interested here. He likes big, strong stems with lots of flavour, sort of chef he is. I've offered to do it for him.
So the covering down with compost is not about
the
forcing.
compost
that's about...
they like a lot of feed, so they really appreciate some compost. Best time to put compost down would be in the early spring for them, really.
Right, so not yet.
No, maybe late winter, early spring is a good time to put compost in.
And then Bernie asks a question, which is actually a really good question about raspberry canes. She says, when should they be trimmed to 6 inches? So can you explain maybe the difference between the sort of summer and autumn varieties of raspberries?
Yes, I noticed we had one question. Somebody wanted to know what they were, summer and autumn raspberries. They weren't sure what they had. They're the simplest of all pruning, really. Autumn raspberries, you cut everything to the ground in February, or a couple of centimeters off the ground traditionally. Everything is cut down, and they fruit on this year's canes. So the person who asked the question about what are they, if you cut everything to the ground next February, then the canes will either produce next August, or they will just grow next year and produce the following year, which means they're summer fruiting. That's the way you check, really. But very simple. Summer fruiting, you cut all the canes down just after fruiting, all the ones that are fruited, and leave the new ones to grow. And autumn fruiting, as I say, you cut to the ground in February, the easiest pruning of all to do.
Yeah, okay. Can you grow raspberries in a polytunnel, Richard?
You can, but there's not a great deal of point, because it's not like you're desperate to have them 2 weeks early or anything. And they occupy the space throughout the summer when you can be growing other things. So there's no real advantage in it, and it uses expensive and valuable tunnel space, really.
Yeah, okay. Somebody's asking in the questions we got in advance about Mary, I think, which is the best mulch for apple, pear, and plum trees?
I noticed that question actually. I wouldn't use leaf mold. Leaf mold is a very good mulch ground cover, but it has no nutrients at all. And most fruit likes a fair bit of feeding. Compost has plant nutrients in, so it's compost or well-rotted manure all the way, really. All leaf mulch does is covers the surface and keeps the soil healthy, but there's no feeding in it for your plants.
Okay, so like, would you be mulching apple trees every year?
Mature apple trees very happy to grow against grass, but I don't mulch to keep the grass down. Early on, you need to keep the grass down, but once they're up and running, they're actually probably a bit healthier covered in grass than bare soil. I feed them every year with our own compost, but it's not a mulching. I just give them a little sprinkling around the roots, but it's not thick enough to actually kill the grass off or anything. It's just a feeding, an organic feeding.
Okay. And then somebody asked, could you please share some useful tips on how to prune fruit trees? Apple, pear, plum, and cherry.
Right. Apples. You've got two choices, and we have both demonstrated here on the garden. You can follow the books we're in front of me here. I can see out the window, well, out the glass house. Are espalier fruits, which require a lot of detailed pruning, or you can produce any shape you want by careful shaping to begin with. What I recommend, but we'd have to have a 3 or 4 hour session for me to describe all of that to you. What I have demonstrated here is my technique, which I developed over the years, of leaf trees to it and then tidy them up later. And all the different varieties want to grow in different ways and different shapes. And that means you get a lot of fruit early on. The tree can look slightly odd shaped. And then you tidy them up after 3 or 4 years. So if you plant your apple trees, particularly if you've got an easy care variety like the varieties I recommended earlier, then leave them to it and then tidy them up after 3 or 4 years. So it gives you a few years to get the hang of pruning before you have to do much to it. I mean, trees are not sitting there thinking, I really hope a human being comes along and cuts bits off me. You know, they do know how to grow. So you can, if in doubt, just leave them to get on with it. Anything. Have a good reason to prune if you're going to. But apples, pears, you prune in the winter. I'm not pruning yet because they haven't gone dormant yet. There's still leaves on them. Again, it's the same as the bare root transplanting season. All the work you do with fruit is done in the winter, really, apart from the picking, which is the nice, easy bit. For plums and cherries, actually, you do prune those in the summer. That's to control a disease called silverleaf, a fungal disease. So you prune those usually in May, June time, June. In the same way as apples, again, you can leave them to it and then tidy them up later. The very, very important thing with plums, the last few years here, we've been frosted out every year with the blossoms, so we haven't really had any. But if you get a good crop, thin the fruit. I've lost branches before by not thinning vigorously enough. The commercial adage is 3 fingers between each fruit. Thin it so you sometimes when you get a really good set of fruit, you can be thinning 9 out of 10 fruitlets. If you don't, whole branches can come off. The same with apples, actually. You should always thin apples to 1 at the most 2 fruits per spur. So there's only 1 or 2 fruits sitting together. But when you are pruning, learn the difference between fruit wood and growth wood.
What is the difference?
The little knobbly bits that produce fruit on tree fruit.
Only you would get away with saying something like that at lunchtime.
Well, that's what they are. Little knobbly bits, which people with a tidy frame of mind would think, oh, I've got to take those off. They look very untidy. That's where the fruit comes from. The long, straight growth doesn't have fruit on. And if you plant a tree, leave it to get on with it and see what happens. And you'll see that as it grows, it will start on the older wood producing lots of little knobbly bits, which are the fruit spurs. They're where your fruit's going to come from, and the flowers and the fruit. So you want to maximize those on a structure which isn't going to snap. And the tree, if you start chopping bits off fairly randomly, which back garden people can sometimes do, thinking that's what the tree wants to happen, then what you'll often get is loads of very vigorous upright growth. What you actually want is sideways growth, which tends to have the most fruiting spurs on. So you don't want vigorous upright growth. You want lots of horizontal growth pushed out with fruit spurs on.
Okay. And somebody asked about Damien about pruning black currants, blueberries, and raspberries. So raspberries, I think we've covered. What about the
Yeah,
black currants
blueberries and
and
black currants. They
I
I
don't really
assume
need
actually
pruning,
this
do they?
person knows a little bit about what I'm on about, because in a funny sort of way, blackberries, black currants, sorry, and blueberries are pruned in a similar way. They both fruit on middle-aged wood, is the best way to look at it. They don't have a permanent structure. What you want to do is you place a third of the wood every year, let them grow for a couple of years, and then when they're growing vigorously, maybe in the fourth year, start cutting the older wood out. And that gives you a constant supply of young wood, which will become the middle-aged wood in the second and third year, and that's when it crops best. So hack them out quite low to the ground, usually where there's another shoot coming. You grow them like that to keep you're taking about a third of the wood out every year. That's what you're going for, all the older wood.
Okay, I have black currants at home, just to say, for the non-pruning people in the audience, and I have never pruned them once.
No,
And they're enormous, and they get like tons more black currants than we can get around to, even for freezing. So I don't know, am I just lucky, or is it?
no, that's what I said earlier, really. If you don't know how to prune, don't do any pruning at all, because
Yeah,
trees and bushes know how to grow. I mean, here, obviously, to keep the kitchen happy, I'm going for maximum commercial yield, so
yeah,
I'm pruning to achieve that. But if I didn't prune at all, it wouldn't be that I get no fruit. I just get a bit less fruit, you know.
yeah, yeah. Somebody asked then about Anne asked, can you prune hazelnut trees that have got too tall, and when should I do it?
Right, that really depends on what you want your hazel to do. If you want to produce hazelnuts, then again, it's the classic horizontal, weak-looking growth will have the nuts on. It takes a long time. Ours are just starting to produce nuts now, and they're 5 years in now. But if they're ornamental, like I have hazels around the car parks and so on here, and you cut those pretty much to the ground, a few centimeters above the ground, right down, called coppicing, and then you produce vigorous upright stems every year. Maybe leave them to grow 2 or 3 years, and that's traditional production of hazel rods for bean sticks or for old thatching houses and so on. It was partly for that reason, it was one of the noble trees of the Celts, because it was such a valuable one for nuts and for uh, small timbers. But you can't get it to do both. So you're either growing it for nuts, in which case, cut out all the vigorous growth and leave the horizontal, weaker growth. But if you're growing as an ornamental, then it looks lovely if you coppice it. Cut it to the
Okay.
ground every couple of years.
Okay, Kirsten's asking in the chat there, she said, sorry if we've already covered this. I've a small pear tree. She's had it in a pot since early summer. She'd like to transfer it into the garden. When should she do that, basically? So she's moving it out of the pot, presumably.
If it's in a pot, you get a bit more leeway when you can transplant it, but any time from now in a pot.
It depends, though, doesn't it? Whether she says she's had it in a pot since early summer, so did she only move it into the pot in early summer, in which case mightn't have much of a chance to establish itself yet, would it?
A pear I would get out as soon as possible. So you don't actually want it to get what would be known as root ball, which is the roots going round and round the pot, because then they really don't take very well out in the field and grow a good root system. So get it out as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Would be my advice. Even if it hasn't made a proper root ball, that's quite good, because the plant will grow way more vigorously though.
Okay. I have two not blackberries, blueberries in pots at home, Richard. I bought them from English's, or no, from not from English's, the place in Cork.
Future Forest.
Future Forests, exactly.
Future
Beautiful.
Forest, an excellent nursery. I'd give them a plug now if we can do such a thing. Yeah.
Beautiful blueberry plants in pots, but quite small pots, and I want to keep them in pots up on the deck by the house. Is this
I'd recommend them in pots, actually. I'll explain why in a moment.
Is this a good time to move them into a bigger pot, or should I leave it to the spring?
Traditionally, you leave them to the spring when they're growing, but potting up you can do anytime really, because you don't disturb the root ball. You just move it into a bigger pot, so you can do it anytime. Traditionally, though, it's done in the spring. Make sure you use heather compost, ericaceous compost, not regular potting compost.
Ericaceous is a sort of slightly acid, is it?
Slightly acid, that's right.
Right.
But the way they're handy in pots, I did this once before. They expect to grow in a country which has proper summers and proper winters, not like Ireland. So they should come out the tunnel for winter, because to get lots of fruit, you need a frost on them. They need cold weather to give them the message to produce fruit. And then the hotter you can get them in the summer, the tastier and bigger the fruit will be.
Huh.
I trialed them. There's actually in my mother's glass house many years ago. Put them out for the winter, and then brought them in the spring, and that seemed to increase quality and quantity of fruit from when they were just left outside all the time. So outside for the winter, inside for the summer.
That's interesting. It's kind of counterintuitive almost.
But they want the cold. I mean, you think they grow in places like the Midwest in America, where you get real winters, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we've covered all of the fruit questions. Let's just run through these other ones. So actually, well, there's one in Lorraine has asked a question. The second half of her question is fruit related. She says, do indoor glass houses blueberry plants need watering in the winter?
Well, hopefully you put them outside and they won't do.
Yeah,
if they're in pots, get them outside, because that will increase the amount of fruit you have the next year. It's too warm in a tunnel or glass house for them.
Yeah, okay. And she also asked how to grow tomatoes from old tomatoes this season that are left to decay on the soil in the glass house. Not quite sure what she's getting at there.
Does she mean the seeds or the roots? Because anyway, just answer both.
Yeah, the seeds, I suppose. She's talking about
the seeds. You need to leave the which will happen naturally on the floor of a glass house or tunnel, them to ferment and go a bit smelly, essentially the juice, because that breaks down dormancy in the seeds, and then dry the seeds off after that. But if you've left them, the tomatoes to rot on the floor of a tunnel or glass house, I mean, you always end up with weeds growing the next year anyway, weed tomatoes. Then you can just pick the seeds up from the floor of the tunnel and sow them if you want.
Yeah.
And if you want to save the roots, they're not an annual tomatoes, they're a short-lived perennial. And it is possible too late now, I should imagine, unless you possibly in a glass house, they'll still be alive. You can pot them up and keep them somewhere warm and dry. You don't want to get them too wet, and then they'll sprout again in the spring. Whether it's worth it or not, I don't know, but it's interesting if you want to, it's a fiddly thing to do, to experiment.
Okay, so a couple of kind of, I think we get the same questions every month. These couple. Do you have any pest recommendations for a normal garden with lots of slugs, natural and non-toxic? That's from Gillian.
Okay, yeah, slugs are the only thing I actually use chemicals for, organic here. So I use a chemical I'm allowed to use as an organic grower. They're called iron phosphate slug pellets, various names, I think Slug-O or Slug-X or whatever. But yeah. Iron phosphate, and they're non-toxic to the environment, so birds eating the slugs won't be harmed and so on. They're nowhere near as effective as the deadly poisonous metaldehyde ones, but they don't damage the food chain, so they're available. But generally, slug control I achieve here by doing lots of different things. Keeping an area clear around a crop, like if you just a new seed bed of salads and so on in the spring, so there's nowhere for them to hide. Trapping, you can use beer traps if you're so minded, or you can just put planks down or rocks down, and the slugs will go underneath them, and then make sure you come every day and collect them. And I would tend to send them to the garden in the sky, but other people might want to rehome them and collect them up. Cultivating the ground vigorously can leave them exposed to crows and blackbirds and so on. And when you first transplant crops, you can cover them with dried seaweed is a good repellent that lasts till the next heavy shower of rain. I've never found the idea of things like sand or pine needles or eggshells in any way effective. As regards the copper wire thing, I've no idea. I don't know how you get a seedbed level enough to put a wire half an inch above the ground.
No, we did in one of the online courses we did, which is I think it was the How Food Grows one, which is on our website actually. Shameless plug. We did an experiment where we wrapped a basil. We had basil growing in a pot, and we wrapped a copper tape around the pot, and we have footage of a slug crawling over the copper tape to get at the basil. So it's completely does not work. And Lisa says there in the comment, she's tried a different couple of beers for slug, like for a beer trap. Slugs seem to avoid them. Should I be looking at a strong ale or other types of beer?
Bizarrely, when I used to teach horticulture, students had to do their own experiment. And I had one guy who was an importer of organic beers and did a trial on which beers were most effective. And possibly because he had lots of them to sell, I don't know. But he found that organic Pilsner from Eastern Europe was the most effective at attracting slugs.
I have found non-alcoholic beer doesn't work, so I'm assuming it's the alcohol.
No, you wouldn't want to buy that anyway, would you? Really?
But so is it the alcohol that's attracting the slugs, or the sugar, or what is it? I wonder.
Well, I thought the alcohol actually killed them, but I might be hopelessly wrong on that. Maybe they drown, but I don't know. I've no idea how they. I've never actually used the technique myself, but I mean, you do collect them, slugs, and it's one of those interesting things to do. Whether you should encourage kids to do it, I'm not sure really. Yeah. But the easier technique is probably just to put heavy planks down on the ground, and they will collect the slugs, and then just come and collect them up.
Kirsten says she can second that. Grew up in Germany, and Pilsner always worked very well. So that's good.
Works for most Germans, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so somebody else asked, Antoinette talked about she seems to have now that she's growing food, she seems to have so many insects, spiders, snails and slugs, which were never there when there was just a lawn. Did they arrive with the vegetables?
That sounds fantastic.
I was thinking the same, biodiversity coming into your garden.
A lawn is an ecological desert, and really should have no place apart from as an area to have a picnic or have your kids playing football on, really. We minimize the area. Grass is just paths here, really. That's all we have it for. And leave it to grow long, and then you get a load of invertebrates. But a lawn is dead. Growing veg is an interesting varied habitat, and if you're using poisons, build it and they will come. So yes, slugs are a pain, but the population of spiders I have here now is fantastic, particularly in the tunnel and glasshouse actually. So yeah, that's what will happen. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So a couple of questions about kind of making the most of the veg patch in the winter. I think we covered a lot of this last month, and obviously there's the kind of the classics, like you can still sow garlic, you can still sow overwintering broad beans. What about
broad beans now?
Is it?
Unless you're in a very mild area. I suppose where you are down by the coast, you get away with it, but not many people will be on the south coast like you there. So,
would they not just, if you planted them at this time though, would they not just sort of sit there and do nothing until the spring, and then, what's the risk?
You're just a softie from the south coast, Mick. Yes, you can get away with it, but other people have more of a challenge.
This is one of these cases where I want you to agree with me eventually, if I keep prodding you.
Yeah, no, what you want with them is to be big enough to go through winter frosts, but not so big they'll get knocked down by the weather. So I find that late October is ideal. And then, we just have them emerging now as small plants, and I find they go through the winter best. But with the climate emergency, put them in, what's the worst that can happen? You might get away with it. The old certainties are falling apart now.
What about the salads and things, depending on whether you have a tunnel or a glass
nothing
house
now.
or not?
You wouldn't sow anything. Wait till March to sow your salads. Really,
even in a tunnel.
Yeah, yes. They will germinate, but they will bolt as soon as February comes around, and they will get sort of this high and then bolt. So when I did trial dates, I found anything later than the end of October was a massive risk in a tunnel. And I will sow again in a tunnel in January, mid-January. And that is for our leaves for the kitchen from mid-March onwards.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's all of the questions. Oh wait, now somebody's put one up there. Any tips for a waterlogged allotment, water pooling between raised beds, dug drills about 1 meter wide?
Well, we had a very, very wet site here, if you remember. And the only thing you can do is to put drainage in. Often, if it's an allotment where soil's been dumped, like here, the soil that I turned into the garden was dumped really from the building work. And often there is an impermeable layer from where diggers and things drove over. Maybe it's an urban allotment. I obviously don't know. And you have to break that up. So what I did in the veg patch here was to dig down to about 50 centimeters and then break down the base of the trench that I was digging with a pickaxe to another 50 centimeters. Wow. I think you were busy with meetings for that period as well, Mick. And that then created a drainage into stuff that wasn't compacted. But if you don't have the wherewithal to do that, then you just have to raise the beds more and more. And I don't mean using a wooden raised bed. You can just dig large trenches. And years ago, in a past life, I grew vegetables in East Africa, and we were partly in a swamp. And there, the tradition was to have about 1 meter trench between each bed. And then if you have 1 meter clear, then that's fine. So unfortunately, there's no way around it apart from break up the subsoil so that water can go straight down into something permeable underneath.
Okay. Not great news, I would say, for our for our.
Well, think how much money you save on gym membership.
Yeah, true. Okay, so there's one question there might come back to in a second. I just want to mention a couple of things. Firstly, we've got just a reminder in the resources section on the website. There's a monthly to-do section that if you go into that, it gives you sort of a list of things to be doing in the garden at this, at whatever time of the year. And there's also loads of amazing other resources up there, loads of videos. The veg directory, the veg directory is still, I think, the most visited page on the website. There's loads of amazing content up there about different vegetables and how to grow them. And obviously, if you on the in the veg patch page for this webinar, if you sign up there, you'll get reminders each month about when the webinar is on. Next one won't be on until the end of January. Richard goes into hibernation in
Looking forward to it.
Reading a book and drinking whiskey
and a few baskets of logs, and I'm a happy man for a few weeks.
Very nice, Richard. And you need to double your efforts on the lazy beds before you leave, though, obviously.
No comment.
And the other thing is to mention, this being Black Friday, obviously, we've got our own Green Friday happening on the website. So if you want to check out the shop, we've got discount if you put in the discount code green10, you will get a 10% discount on all of the products there. So if you're a Black Friday kind of a person, we've got that there for you as well. Richard, what would be top of your list of favorite Christmas gifts you've ever got from a gardening perspective? By the way, I don't need to know about your the lovely pajamas that your partner bought for you or anything like that.
No, I'm sure you don't. A good pair of secateurs, if it's a fruit day to day. And remember
when you say good pair, is that
Falco's is the traditional professional gardener one. And as a young gardener starting off quite a few years ago, my parents remember bought me some Falco's for Christmas present, and I felt I'd made it at that. It was a good quality spade, stainless steel spade. I've had one of those for Christmas as well at different times. And as something more permanent, as I said, it's a great time of year to put in fruit bushes and trees. So get bare root bushes and fruit. They establish much better than things in pots. Get those, and you can heal them in if it's get them a week or two before Christmas. Just dig a little hole, drop them in a hole, and then you've got something to plant in the new year, and that's a long-lasting present.
I got a very nice copper rake for Christmas one year from my sister, which was I think from Fruit Hill Farm probably, and it's just a beautiful thing. It's a kind of I suppose a general thing with tools, like the better quality you get, the more long lasting they are. It's a kind of a truism, isn't it?
But I don't think you'd ever work tools out, would you, Mick?
Well, I have actually worn the handle of the copper rake out
from leaning on it.
Yeah, from leaning on it, exactly. Well, whatever works to get the raking done, and isn't it true that little bits of copper come off into the soil as you're raking to feed the soil, or is that something she made up to excite me?
Pass.
You don't think that's true?
Well, I'm sure bits of copper come off, but if you've got a copper deficient soil, that might be beneficial, but
that's really ruined it, because I used to love raking the soil because I was thinking
I know there's a little bit of a sort of muck and magic thing about copper being connected with something or other, and
you're not going for it. Don't worry about it. I still love that rake. So if anyone wants to buy me the copper spade to go along with it, that would be lovely. That's it from us then. And thanks a million to everyone, particularly those of you that have joined us for the for all of these webinars each year. We'll be back in January, and in the meantime, hope you get some downtime in the garden over the Christmas period, and we'll talk to you on the other side. Thanks a million, Richard. Yeah, take care. Thanks a million.